Hello, class. Welcome to another presentation. Throughout this lecture, we will continue to explore the idea of ethics. Now, at its core, ethics is about how we weigh values rather than simply trading moral claims. It's not necessarily about stating what is right or wrong, but it's more so about understanding the deeper principles that guide our decision making. It's important to understand that when we engage in ethical deliberation, we tend to emphasize our values and moral standards. This process helps us navigate complex issues by allowing us to reflect on what truly matters to us and how our choices align with those beliefs. Now, as we continue to learn more about the concept of ethics, we'll unpack the role of values in shaping our ethical framework. Three key frameworks must be addressed when we talk about ethics: one, virtue ethics; two, duty ethics; and three, consequentialist ethics. It is imperative to understand that each of these philosophies offer a unique perspective on moral reasoning and decision making. Now, to broaden the discussion, we'll look first at virtue ethics. Virtue ethics focuses on the character traits we should cultivate to lead a good life. Duty ethics emphasize our moral obligations and the importance of adhering to those duties. Finally, consequentialist ethics evaluates the morality of action based on their outcomes. It's important that we recognize the interconnectedness of these philosophies as they can overlap and evolve over time, thus enriching our understanding of ethics and providing a more nuanced approach to moral dilemmas. By considering these frameworks together, we can better navigate the complexities of ethical decision making. Over the next couple slides, we'll unpack each framework individually. We'll begin with virtue ethics. The core question driving the virtue ethics framework is, what would a virtuous person do? This approach emphasizes the cultivation of character and virtues, such as courage and wisdom, as essential to leading a morally good life. But as with any philosophy, there's often criticism. Now, one of the major criticisms of virtue ethics is its somewhat vague definition of what constitutes a good character. The point is, different cultures and individuals may interpret virtues differently, leading to ambiguity in moral guidance. However, a significant strength of the framework lies in its flexibility. Virtue ethics allows for adaptability based on personal and professional contexts. Fundamentally, what it means to act virtuously can vary depending on the situation, making it a practical and relevant framework for ethical decision making. The doctrine of the means is a concept that is closely aligned with the framework. Now, when looking at ethical decision making, it's important to consider the doctrine of the means. This concept posits that virtue is found between two extremes: excess and deficiency. For instance, courage represents a balance between the vices of cowardice and recklessness. This idea indeed highlights as essential the application of virtue ethics. There is no one size fits all ethical manual, and what is considered virtuous can vary greatly depending on the context. Recognizing this nuance allows us to better navigate moral dilemmas by understanding that ethical behavior often requires finding the right balance in each unique situation. In looking at virtue as practice, one key social dimension of virtue ethics is that virtues are essential for performing our social roles effectively. Whether in our personal lives or professional capacities, virtues guide our interactions and responsibilities. We also need to consider the distinction between internal good and external good. Now, internal good are those that enrich the practice itself, while external good focus on broader social benefits, such as those seen in fields like medicine and journalism. Finally, engaging with the standards of excellence within a particular practice fosters ethical behavior. By striving to meet these standards, we not only improve our skills, but also enhance our moral integrity in our respective roles. This commitment to excellence is therefore what truly embodies the practice of virtue in our daily lives. Let's turn our attentions to the idea of flourishing. Flourishing encompasses both individual and social well being, emphasizing that our personal growth is deeply intertwined with the health of our communities. Key components of flourishing include the presence of just social systems, which ensure fairness and equality, engagement and cooperation among individuals, fostering a sense of belonging, and virtuous behavior that actively supports and strengthens our communities. Now, some philosophers argue that the true human flourishing requires social collaboration and virtuous action. It's not just about personal success, it's about working together and embodying virtues that uplift everyone, creating a harmonious environment where we can all thrive. In terms of the contemporary relevance of virtue ethics, from a neo Aristotelian perspective, modern thinkers have continued to apply Aristotle's ideas to tackle today's pressing issues, showing how these timeless concepts can inform our current moral landscape. One important aspect of this is moral ecology, which emphasizes the significance of shared vision for flourishing within society. By fostering a collective understanding of what it means to thrive, we can create environments that support the well being of all individuals. The contributions of modern thinker Philippa Foot is particularly noteworthy here, as she connects traditional virtues to modern ethical living. Her work demonstrates how these virtues remain essential in guiding our actions and decisions in a complex world. Foot believes that the integration of classical ideas with contemporary challenges can indeed cultivate a more ethical society. Now that we've spent some time discussing virtue ethics, let's turn our focus to duty ethics. The duty ethics framework focuses on what we ought to do as moral agents. It emphasizes our moral obligations and the responsibilities we carry in our decision making. Duty ethics compels us to consider our actions not merely in terms of outcomes, but through the lens of our duties and commitment to others. Here's a question I would like you all to ponder on. What exactly do we mean when we say individuals have a moral obligation? The core argument here is that there are moral obligations that bind us as individuals, guiding our actions and decisions. When we make moral judgments, it's crucial that these are based on our duties rather than the consequences of our actions. This principle asserts that the right takes priority over the good. In other words, our commitment to doing what is morally right must come first, even if it doesn't lead to the best outcomes. This perspective challenges us to think critically about our responsibilities and the ethical standards we uphold in our lives. Where does intent come into all of this? Intent is crucial as it shapes our moral responsibilities and the critical weight of our actions. But we must make important distinctions in intent and consider the nuances to help clarify our moral obligations. For instance, There's a difference between intending harm and merely predicting harm, as well as between taking risk and inadvertently causing it. Let's examine the rights of individuals in the context of duty ethics. A fundamental moral right is that individuals should never be used merely as a means to an end. This principle underscores the inherent dignity of each person and the importance of treating others with respect. Consent plays a critical role in moral action. It ensures that individuals have agency in decisions that affect their lives. However, this raises important tensions, particularly when we consider scenarios involving the prevention of harm versus the need to respect individual lives. Balancing these competing demands in a complex world is also a complex challenge in ethical decision making, highlighting the need for careful consideration of both rights and responsibilities. Immanuel Kant was a leading figure in duty ethics. At the heart of his philosophy is a categorical imperative, which serves as the fundamental principle of our moral duties. Kant argued that there exists a universal moral law that should apply to all rational agents, regardless of their individual circumstances or goals. This means that our actions must be guided by maxims that can be consistently willed as universal laws. By adhering to this principle, we can ensure that our moral decisions are grounded in reason and respect for the inherent dignity of all individuals. Kant famously claimed that a conflict of duties is inconceivable. However, this assertion presents a philosophical challenge as we often encounter real conflicts in our moral obligations. And for this reason, philosophers like W.D. Ross offers valuable insights, suggesting that deliberation can involve what he calls moral risk when duties clash. This acknowledgement of uncertainty reflects the complexities of ethical decision making, where we must weigh competing obligations and recognize that our moral choices may not always be clear cut. Essentially, Ross went on to present the concept of prima facie duties, which is imperative to this discussion. Prima facie duties are duties that are considered self evident to any reasoning individual, providing a foundational framework for moral decision making. In his work, Ross outlined several key duties that guide our ethical responsibilities. 1. Honesty, which is the obligation to be truthful. 2. Fidelity, the duty to keep promises. 3. Reparation, the commitment to right the wrongs we've committed. 4. Gratitude, the importance of acknowledging and returning favors. 5. Promoting welfare and justice, which means we're simply striving for the well being of others and fairness in society. Number 6, non maleficence, the duty to avoid causing harm. And number 7, self improvement, which is the obligation to strive for personal growth. Now, let's talk about how we navigate conflicts between our duties. A key aspect of this process is understanding moral weight, which entails making reasoned arguments for prioritizing certain duties over others. For example, in some situations, the duty to minimize harm may outweigh the promise we've made. This highlights the complexity of moral decision making, where context plays a crucial role. As such, Ross recognizes this moral uncertainty and considers it a strength of his approach. By acknowledging that our duties can conflict and that we may not always have clear answers, Ross invites us to engage in thoughtful deliberation, enhancing our ability to make ethical choices in real world scenarios. One significant tension in ethics lies in balancing the pursuit of universal moral truth with the need to navigate ambiguity and complexity in real life situations. Ross offers an important perspective on this issue. He argues that mistakes in moral reasoning, often stemming from inadequate information, should not incur moral blame. This recognition of our human limitations underscores the importance of understanding context and the potential for error in deliberations. By acknowledging that we may not always have all the answers, we can approach moral decision making with humility and a commitment to continuous learning. So far, we've explored virtue ethics and duty ethics. Let's begin to unpack the consequentialist ethics framework. Now, the consequentialist ethics framework shifts the moral weight from duties or intentions to the outcomes of actions. The key question in this approach is simple: is the act justified based on the results it produces? This stands in contrast to the other ethical frameworks. Now, going back to what we discussed earlier, duty ethics emphasizes respect for rationality and moral obligations, while virtue ethics focuses on the cultivation of character and virtues. By prioritizing outcomes, consequentialist ethics invites us to consider not just what we intend to do, but the actual impact of our actions on individuals and society as a whole. The concept of utilitarianism is critical to this discussion. In exploring the principle of the greatest benefit for the greatest number, one must point out that the idea traces its roots back to hedonistic origins, where early utilitarianism defined utility primarily in terms of pleasure. However, as philosophical thought evolved, later thinkers began to expand the definition to include broader concepts of good, such as freedom and knowledge. This brings us to holistic utilitarianism, which encourages us to compare the total consequences of an action rather than just focusing on individual acts. For example, it allows for justifying punishment as a necessary part of maintaining justice in society. Within utilitarianism, we can also distinguish between two key approaches: act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. Act utilitarianism concentrates on specific actions and their direct outcomes, while rule utilitarianism assesses actions based on their adherence to establish rules that are believed to lead to the best overall consequences. One of the major debates in utilitarianism revolves around which pleasures should be considered valuable and how we can rank them effectively. Understandably, this question poses significant challenges as not all pleasures carry the same weight for every individual. John Stuart Mill, a key figure in this discussion, came to a profound realization that true happiness is often best pursued through altruistic aims rather than merely self interest. Mills emphasized that when we focus on the well being of others and engage in actions that promote collective happiness, we find a deeper, more fulfilling sense of happiness for ourselves. This shift from self centered pleasure to a broader perspective on well being is essential in refining our understanding of utility in ethical decision making. All right, class, so we will stop here for this week. I know it's a lot of information and a lot to ponder on as you complete the assignments this week, but thank you all for joining me for the lecture. Remember, the ideas we've explored today are not just theoretical. They have real implications for how we think about ethics and decision making in our lives. I encourage you to reflect on these concepts as you continue your studies. Have a great day.